Oh, thank you very much, for coming to the second of our Open Borders research seminars. And yes, the last one happened just a few weeks ago, and it'll be online very soon. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But just in order, before we introduce our wonderful speakers, I just wanted to introduce the conveners. As all of you will know, this is Marina Rimsha on the screen from the Indonesia program at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who is convening this program with us, and us being Judith Mizrahi Barak from the Research Center EMA at the University Paul Valéry Montpellier III, and myself, Nicole Thiara from Nottingham Trent University's Post-Colonial Studies Center. Just a few words in terms of housekeeping. I just need to let you know that this session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on the recording, please keep your camera switched off, and also make sure that your microphones are switched off during, when the speakers speak. And of course, later on, we'll open it for questions, and Marina will tell you how we're going to go about this time in an orderly fashion. But while our speakers are speaking, please make sure to have them switched off. The recording will be published on our new YouTube channel, On Page On Stage, and we know Verma is currently working on this one. So the first session will be published very, very soon, and we will let the network know as soon as it is up. And there are still slots, there if you want to present in this series of our webinar series. The next session will take place in 2 weeks' time, and this will be the last one in this calendar year, but we have more lined up for next year. But now, without further ado, let me present or introduce today's speakers. I'm so pleased to welcome the independent scholar Malarvizhi Jayanth, who completed her PhD at the University of Chicago in South Asian Studies just in June. So congratulations on that, Mala, that is wonderful news. And please let me also introduce J. Balasubramaniam from Madurai Kamaraj University, where he teaches journalism, and both working on the writings of Rettaimalai Srinivasan. And I think it's very interesting to see their different perspectives, and hopefully we at the end of the session we can ask them, how their projects, overlap and so on. So the title of today's session is Writing Dalit Autobiography in Colonial India: The Story of Rettaimalai Srinivasan. And just before Mala will start presenting, she will be speaking first. I just want you to thank you, Mala, because it is quite touching that you are one of the first in this particular series of events, because you were also one of the speakers in our very first conference that Judith and I organized at Nottingham Trent University. So that is lovely. And welcome, Balasubramaniam. It's wonderful meeting you too for the first time.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for doing this seminar on this important figure in Dalit writing and politics, who is not nearly as well known outside Tamil Nadu as he deserves to be. So I'm delighted that you're doing this program. So thank you very much. I think Mala will be speaking first, and then Balasubramaniam, and then we will be opening for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that introduction. Rettaimalai Srinivasan's work provides a missing piece of anti-caste history, detailing the work of a Dalit leader who stood by the national leader Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the struggle for freedom from caste in colonial India. In my presentation, I want to focus on how Srinivasan's writing challenges our view of the world in 4 ways. First, it reworks Dalit literary history by pushing back the timeline of Dalit literary production, while, like many other Dalit autobiographies, challenging our view of what constitutes the autobiographical genre itself. Second, Srinivasan's work expands our understanding of the practice of caste in colonial India, showing the extreme segregation it produces. Third, it shows the interplay between regional and national aspects of the anti-caste movement, demonstrating that its vocabulary and rhetoric were forged in the fire of political mobilization. And finally, it shows us the true freedom struggles that were underway in late colonial India, and demonstrates that the anti-colonial movement for freedom from British rule sometimes undercut and destabilize the struggle for freedom from caste. To expand upon the first point, to see how Rettaimalai Srinivasan's autobiography reworks Dalit literary history, I will have to pin this text onto the timeline of Dalit writing in general. While Dalit autobiography is often demarcated as a genre that rose to prominence in the 1990s, the work of Rettaimalai Srinivasan, who lived between 1860 and 1945, shows its longer genealogy. Late 19th century and early 20th century Dalit writing in Tamil, such as his autobiography, and other examples of flourishing Dalit journalism and political engagement from the period are yet to be admitted into either the literary canon or much of existing literary or political histories. The two landmark studies on anti-caste movements in Tamil country, for instance, one by V. Geeta and S. V. Rajadurai, and the other by M.S.S. Pandian, do not mention Srinivasan. Srinivasan's autobiography, written and published in the Tamil language in 1938, is likely the first Dalit autobiography, making this omission a significant one. I leave some room for doubt on whether this is the first autobiography because our knowledge of Dalit literary production in colonial India is still piecemeal and growing. My co-presenter Bala, for example, has shown in his work on Dalit journalism that in the Tamil language at least, there was a vibrant Dalit print culture in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Unless Madras presidency, from which much of these journals flourished, was an anomaly in terms of literacy among Dalit groups, there is room to speculate that there is Dalit writing in other languages that is yet to receive its due from this period. Srinivasan likely wrote this autobiography at around the same time that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was writing his autobiographical notes titled Waiting for a Visa, dated to around 1935 to 36. While Dr. Ambedkar's notes would eventually only be published in 1990, Srinivasan's autobiography was published in 1938. The only known reprints followed in 1999, this is the 1999 reprint, and in 2017. As you can see, the autobiography is a very small, slim volume, carrying his sole surviving photograph on the cover. The date of publication of 1938 makes it one of the oldest known, if not the first, autobiographies. This shows us that the renaissance of Dalit writing in 1990s is just that, the renaissance of a much older tradition. Like other Dalit autobiographies, though, this one too challenges our preconceptions of what autobiography should look like. In the preface to the text, Srinivasan writes, and I read from my translation here, I have seen improvement in the community now known as the Adi Dravidas. I have seen this within the small span of 50 years of my lifetime, among the many thousands of years of history. I intend that this narrative should be added to the social history of the Adi Dravidas. This historical account will show that everything done by those of other communities and religions for the progress of these people was only a quest for personal gain, while the people of this society have been doing well for themselves through ceaseless effort. Quote ends. Later in my presentation, I will discuss the categories he uses to refer to Dalit people at some length, including the term Adi Dravida. Here, it will suffice to say that at the outset, Srinivasan lays out his life history as one with the social history of Dalits. He emphasizes that the social and political empowerment of Dalits could be traced to their hard work, while the support extended from others was stained by self-interest. The preface indicates that his autobiography should be read as a political biography, chronicling his work for the betterment of Dalit groups. And indeed, the autobiography itself focuses on his work as a historical actor and doesn't give much space for his personal preferences in history. The preface indicates that his autobiography shows his work for Dalit groups both at the regional level in the colonial administrative bloc called the Madras Presidency and at the national level for British India. Moving on to the second point, I will now discuss how Srinivasan's work on autobiography expands our understanding of the practice of caste in colonial India. Srinivasan has vivid memories of being one of the 10 non-Brahmin students in a class of 400 in the 1860s in the Coimbatore School of Arts. I read from my translation of his autobiography here. The rules of caste were maintained very strictly in school. Afraid that the children should find out about my caste, family, and the place I live in if I became friendly with them, I would sit somewhere outside the school reading until after the first bell was rung. Often thinking about the cruelty of not being allowed to join other children and play, I would grow sad and think about how to overcome this obstacle, he writes. This memory of isolation and loneliness at school indicates that education is difficult to access for those from the lower castes, and that fear of isolation and ridicule may have prevented these children from going to school in the first place. Later in his autobiography, Srinivasan writes that he took up work in accountancy, although thoughts about how to undo untouchability never left him. He writes about his move to Chennai, where he, in his words, undertook research on how to uplift people of his caste. He writes that he would walk great distances towards the south along the railway lines and look at the destroyed walls of temples and forts significant to Dalit communities. I read again from my translation of his words. Staying in these parts for a night, I would inquire about such things and see these people living next to several temples without water to bathe or drink, living in temporary huts without paths to walk on and without ways to survive, subject to the cruelty of untouchability wherever they went, beaten if they should so much as open their mouths and talk, living in fear of officials and caste Hindus and practicing deceit out of fear, living in sorrow that cannot be ameliorated. Fully realizing the pain they suffered, I would learn of our old history and return, he writes. In Srinivasan's view, several temples were built on top of monuments for Dalit heroes. While the stories lingered, the people descended from these heroes suffered abject poverty and the pains of exclusion and untouchability. While he notes that caste Hindus created fear among low-caste people here, he later notes that groups of Anglo-Indians, Muslims, and Christians gathered to meet a colonial administrator were angry when a Dalit contingent was allowed into the governor's house with them. This indicates the contempt directed towards those of low caste and practices of untouchability cut across religions at the time. After some years in Chennai, Srinivasan writes, he traveled to parts of Africa for work, returned to India, and was appointed to the Legislative Assembly. After his return to India, he was involved in petitioning the government and passing resolutions on various issues. One of them was the debate around conducting the civil services exam in India in 1894. While nationalist agitators demanded that the exam be held in India as well, and not just in India that was the practice, anti-caste leaders like Srinivasan opposed it. He argued that the elite caste would corner the administrative positions open to them by the exam and would further subjugate lower caste groups. My co-presenter Bala will be discussing this incident at length. Here it is of significance since the petition Srinivasan submitted included remarks on the state of low-caste people in the villages. Since this petition is included in Tamil as an appendix to the autobiography, I read again some paraphrased excerpts from my translation. He says that children of the Paraya caste do not have place to study in the village schools where higher caste children study. This caste did not have paths to walk on in villages where high caste people dwell. In such villages, cattle and their carts may use the walkways, but low caste people cannot. They could not draw water from the same water bodies that villagers drew water from. In many matters, he writes, the villagers treat them like lepers and exclude them from society. Since the English government is giving place to these high caste people to protect their own interests, he writes, some have begun to behave more arrogantly in these times. Yet the Paraya people, who were born as slaves of the soil, have not lost their wisdom, despite the cruel behavior that they traditionally must endure. Quote ends. While Srinivasan thanked the British government for improvements to the lives of low-caste people in other places, here we see that he is critical of them for having indulged elite caste people in protecting their own interests. The petition then goes on to state that a board saying Paraya people should not enter had been put up in a Brahmin street in Mylapore near the house of an Indian High Court judge. He said that children of this caste were not admitted to the Pachappan College established by caste Hindus in Chennai city. Srinivasan writes that his petition was the reason why this board was removed and children were admitted to that college a little later. Later, as a member of the Legislative Assembly, he writes that he brought in a resolution which was made into law, allowing low-caste people to access public roads, wells, buildings, and markets. Thus, Srinivasan's work in the Legislative Assembly undid some of the restrictions on low-caste mobility that he had noted some years ago in the petition against the simultaneous conduct of the civil service exam. Later, in another appendix, he notes how the Iravar caste in Kalpati were permitted to enter a Brahmin settlement as a result of this law. So, Rettaimalai Srinivasan's autobiography shows us that caste in late 19th to early 20th century British India was marked by restrictions on who may access education, by residential segregation, and by lack of access to public space, with low-caste groups bearing the brunt of these practices. They had few advocates for their well-being, and it was through the efforts of Dalit legislators that some of these restrictions were undone. I have already shown that first, Srinivasan's work pushes back the timeline of Dalit literary production. Second, it has demonstrated the nature of caste in colonial India, marked by many forms of segregation. Now I come to the third way in which Srinivasan's autobiography changes our view of the world. It shows us the interplay of regional and national in the anti-caste movement and the dynamism of its vocabulary and rhetoric. The categories that Rettaimalai Srinivasan uses to refer to Dalit groups bear some reflection since they shed light on the political mobilization that he was involved in. As you likely know, I'm using the category of Dalit anachronistically in the presentation, referring to a time before the category was adopted widely. In colonial India, Dalit groups were classified as the depressed classes in administrative documentation. In the preface and in the opening felicitation of Srinivasan's autobiography, he uses the category Adi Dravida, or the original Dravidians. Later in the text, Srinivasan argues that the people subjugated by Aryan invaders from the north became the people known as Paraya or Adi Dravida. Srinivasan is also described as a hero who struggles for the Adi Dravida in the opening felicitation. The autobiography opens with a ceremony of the colonial government bestowing the title of Rao Sahib on Srinivasan and the felicitation given by the revenue collector of Chimberpur district, P. Sitaramaya Pantulu, at the ceremony. In 1893, the collector notes, and I read from my translation again, Srinivasan took Parayan or Paraya, that hated name that had put many generations to great hardship, and began to publish a magazine with that same name, a magazine called Paraya. Quote ends. Well, the English name of the caste, Paraya, has been absorbed into the language as synonymous with outcast. The Tamil word is much more of a slur than a neutral descriptor. In his autobiography, Srinivasan writes, and I read in my translation, unless a member of the Paraya caste comes forward and says, I am Paraya, he will not be able to celebrate freedom and will remain oppressed and a pauper. Therefore, I published a journal crowned with the name Paraya. It was published in October 1893. It was a small monthly with 4 pages. It cost 2 annas a copy. People of my caste, the ones called Paraya, endorsed it with great enthusiasm. The advertisements for the journal and the first print run cost ₹10. In 2 days, some 400 copies were sold inside Chennai city. In 3 months, the journal became a weekly, and after 2 years, there was a printing press. The journal spoke in favor of that section of society called Paraya, sought the support of the government, and discussed the codes of good conduct. Wherever this section of society gathered, there they discussed this journal with great enthusiasm, he writes. Now, the power of this gesture of naming a journal after the Paraya caste and the defiance it encapsulates cannot be overstated. The word Pariya in Tamil carries the same weight as some of the racist terms for black people in the Americas. It is weighted down with shame and degradation of low caste status. Here, Srinivasan takes a caste name with shameful associations and uses it with pride, therefore using it in an anti-caste manner. The reclamation of the caste name then can be listed among Rettaimalai Srinivasan's political achievements. My co-presenter Bala will be speaking more about the ambiguities around the meaning of Pariya. Here, it has to be said that the reclamation of this term is a significant contribution that Srinivasan makes. He further cements this achievement by establishing or participating in the activities of the Pariya Mahajana Sabha and the Adi Dravida Mahajana Sabha, both political associations for the people referred to as Pariya in his writings. While thus far we have heard about Srinivasan's work within the Southern Administrative Bloc, then known as Madras Presidency in British India, his contribution at the national level is equally significant. He is known at the national level for having accompanied Dr. Ambedkar to the Round Table Conference in London to discuss the question of equitable representation in 1928 to 29. Srinivasan notes that he worked closely with Ambedkar for this and that Dalit groups would see the fruits of their effort in the coming elections. He later notes that Gandhi, differing from the decisions of the conference, especially the separate electorates assigned to Dalit groups, sought to undo it by going in the past. This brings us to the fourth arena in which Srinivasan's autobiography expands our understanding of the world. It shows, as he notes in one of his works, that there were two kinds of freedom struggles being waged in colonial India, one against the British and the other against caste. In the anti-caste freedom struggle, people fought for such freedoms as the right to walk on public streets and the right to represent their people on the international stage. Srinivasan writes in his autobiography, and I quote, "I helped people not only in Madras Presidency but all over India achieve national freedom and win their rights." Calling his struggle a freedom struggle then is consonant with the vocabulary that he himself uses to describe his work. Reading history from the Dalit perspective thus overturns conventional understandings of national leaders. The Dalit view of history, as some of you likely know, presents a very different vision of Gandhi. In this view, he is not so much father of the nation as he is stubbornly opposed to allowing Dalit groups their own representatives. Although the All-Party Roundtable Conference held in London agreed to establish separate electorates for Dalit groups, Gandhi went on a fast that resulted in Dalit leaders being coerced into accepting joint electorates as signatories of the Pune Pact. Gandhi was committed to including Dalits, whom he called Harijan, within Hinduism, though Dalit leaders resisted such categorization. While Ambedkar famously called for converting to Buddhism, people like Srinivasan had different views. Srinivasan was conflicted about the reasons why, though. In one place, he argues that Dalits were not Hindus and therefore did not need to convert. In another, he argues that those who have converted to other religions could not be provided the same resistance as Dalits who had not converted. His autobiography, therefore, further demonstrates the diversity of opinion and political work within Dalit-led movements. In conclusion, by demonstrating that Dalit literary production thrived in late colonial India, by showing the vicious and inhuman segregation that caste produces, by demonstrating the interplay of regional and national movements against caste, and by noting how the two freedom struggles in British India related to one another, Srinivasan's autobiography expands our understanding of the world. Srinivasan is slightly better known in the state of Tamil Nadu due to the publication of his autobiography and pamphlets in Tamil. However, his work demonstrates the truly national scope of the anti-caste movement in late colonial India. His autobiography sheds light on the struggle for a different kind of freedom waged by Dalit leaders at the time. It shows that his work spanned many genres of writing, including autobiography, journalism, and pamphlets to educate the public. It expands upon his legislative work as part of the Round Table Conference, as signatory of the Pune Pact, and his work as member of the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Councils. It shows his contribution to building civic associations. The translation of his autobiography and of newly discovered letters and documents will demonstrate how he worked for the uplift of his caste and for Dalit groups more broadly. Together, his works show us the vibrant diversity of Dalit political thought in colonial India. That concludes my presentation. Bala, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Malar. So, I will going to present how Rettaimalai Srinivasan's work through journalism. How did he mobilize the oppressed sections in order to resist the caste practices? So the journal he started, the Parayan, its name was Parayan. So Parayan was a Tamil journal published in colonial Madras between 1893 and 1900. It was edited and published by Rettaimalai Srinivasan, the pioneering Dalit leader, associate of Dr. Ambedkar, as a representative of depressed caste in the Round Table Conference during the 1930s. Rettaimalai Srinivasan was one of the first to organize Dalits in Tamil Nadu and founded the Parayar Mahajana Sabha in 1891. At a time when great stigma was attached to the name, he boldly chose the name to his organization and his journal as Parayan. This also led to a tussle with his contemporary Dalit ideologue, Ayodhya Das Pandit. Unfortunately, only one page of this journal, the Parayan journal, has survived. By carefully poring over the pages of colonial records, especially the annual reports and periodicals, and the native newspaper reports prepared by the government of Madras, I have compiled the English summaries of the articles published in Parayan. This constitutes the only reliable record of the Dalit perspective on various social and political matters of the times, and provides a valuable corrective to the dominant upper caste, middle class Indian nationalist perspective in late 19th century South India. Parayan addressed many of the issues faced by Dalits in the fields of education, employment, untouchability, violence, and political representation. So here, I would like to focus on the issue of simultaneous civil service examination in India, a long-standing demand of Indian National Congress and Parayan's critique of it. Parayan argued that if the civil service examination was conducted in India, it would only benefit Brahmins and other higher castes and reinforce the oppression faced by the Dalits. Parayan further argued that this would result in increasing caste discrimination against Dalits. So, Rettaimalai Srinivasan systematically informed the public about the issue and shaped the Dalit opinion. The debate over simultaneous civil service examination provides a window into how Dalits were educated and mobilized towards through print. So, the late 19th and early 20th colonial period was an important phase for Dalit emancipation. Dalit leaders questioned the ideology and activities of the Indian National Congress right from its inception. They also challenged the Congress assumed authority as the sole representative of all Indians. During this period, Dalit leaders attempted to influence the public sphere, particularly for discussing the problems of Dalits. The Parayan journal reflected the modern social and political aspirations of Dalits, like self-respect, equality, economic independence, education for all, abolition of untouchability, etc. Undoubtedly, the content of the Parayan demonstrates Dalit participation in the construction of modern India. So, here Parayan is considered a significant journal because of its efforts to instill political and social consciousness. Uh, there are, about the Rettaimalai Srinivasan's biography. Malar has touched, upon Rettaimalai Srinivasan's biography. Even though, I would like to say few his, born and brought up details. There are valuable biographical details available from his autobiography, Divan Bahadur, Rettaimalai Srinivasan, GVS Sarithara Surukam. So it means a short biography of Divan Bahadur, Rettaimalai Srinivasan, published by him in 1938. Rettaimalai Srinivasan was born on 7th July 1860 in Madurandagam in Chengalpet district, Tamil Nadu, South India. His father's name was Rettaimalai. He was a Dubashi with the British East India Company, British government. At the age of 22, Rettaimalai Srinivasan started traveling to various places in South India to understand the conditions of the depressed classes. In 1891, he founded the Parayar Mahajana Sabha, one of the earliest organizations of the Dalit. Actually, in his young age, he planned to go to London to place his grievances before the 5th King George of Britain and Emperor of India for the development of the depressed classes. Initially, he went to Zanzibar Island, where he worked for 2 years. Then he moved to Natal in South Africa. In Natal, he worked as a clerk in a court, district court, Verulam district court, for 16 years. So in 1921, he returned to India without achieving his dream of visiting London. In 1923, he was nominated to the Madras Legislative Council. In 1931, he attended the Roundtable Conference along with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a representative of the depressed classes. Until his demise, 18 September 1945, he devoted himself for the development of the depressed classes. So, in his autobiography, Rettaimalai Srinivasan writes that what triggered him to start a journal. He says that in 1893, the British government brought out an order to educate the Pariah people, but unfortunately, the matter did not reach the people concerned. And he adds, as a result, I started a journal called Parayan to inform and educate people. The 4-page journal was sold for 2 annas. The Pariah people recognized it with a lot of expectations. The production and advertisement cost came to around ₹10 for the first issue. Within 2 days, 300 issues were sold in the Madras city. Within 3 months, it became a weekly and we owned a press also. This journal advocated the interest of the Pariah people, approached the British government for support. Wherever the Pariah people gathered, they commented about the journal. He writes, Rettaimalai Srinivasan writes. Rettaimalai Srinivasan became a Dalit icon in the contemporary Dalit movement in Tamil Nadu. All the Dalit movements use the picture of the Rettaimalai Srinivasan to mobilize people. They also commemorate his birth and death anniversaries. There are few Dalit organizations named after Rettaimalai Srinivasan, such as Rettaimalai Srinivasan Peravai. So the journal Parayan, so it was started on 7th October 1893. From March 1894 onwards, it was published as a weekly. So Parayan dealt with many issues of historical importance, like simultaneous examination, separate schools for Parayas, and critique of Indian National Congress, etc. As the journal fully devoted itself to the upliftment of the depressed classes, most of its contents were concerned with Dalit. Going to the point, the civil service examination in India. During the colonial period, Indian civil service aspirants had to go to London to write the civil service examination. According to nationalists and the Congress people, one had to spend huge sums of money just for appearing in the civil service examination, which deterred ordinary Indians from attempting the exams. As a result, they demanded that the civil service examination should be held in India and England simultaneously. Representatives of Indians represented the matter to the House of Commons, England. Mr. Herbert Paul moved a resolution seconded by Dadabhai Naoroji, parliamentarian, UK parliamentarian, on 2nd June 1894, before the Parliament, that the Indian civil service examination should be held simultaneously in England and in India. Finally, the resolution was adopted with the condition that the practicability of the decision depended on the opinion of the Government of India. Accordingly, the Government of India was asked to give its opinion on the subject. The next Secretary of State, Mr. Fowler, announced in Parliament that the situation was not conducive to introduce simultaneous examination in India. Behind this decision, there was a struggle from the Paraya people with the leadership of Rettaimalai Srinivasan. So I will tell you the story. So right from the Paraya on the issue of civil service examination in India, right from the beginning, representatives of Parayas opposed the proposal for simultaneous examination. Parayan Journal also started the propaganda against simultaneous exams, which was the dream goal of congressmen. As a part of its campaign, a meeting was convened by the Rettaimalai Srinivasan. At the meeting, a 112 feet length memorial, the memorial was called Paraya Memorial Memorandum, signed by 3,412 members of Paraya caste, was submitted to the Parliament through General Chesney, protesting the proposal to hold civil service examination in India. Some other language, South Indian language journals also supported the issue. Parayan, the journal, published several articles and sent number of petitions to the government to influence public opinion and the Parliament. And the native newspaper reports in the colonial records contain 6 excerpts from Parayan on the issue of simultaneous examination. Since there was no single, original copy was available, and the colonial records are the only the sources for retrieving the history of Rettaimalai Srinivasan's journal. The Parayan was very clear in its argument that if the proposal of simultaneous examination succeeded, it would grant more power to caste oppressors, the Brahmins. So it allied with Muslims and opposed the proposal. Under the leadership of Rettaimalai Srinivasan, deliberations were held to oppose simultaneous examinations. The Parayan regularly published articles and letters of the correspondence on the issue. The chronological explanation of the content of Parayan would help us to understand the issue of simultaneous examination. Its first article against the issue appeared on 1st December 1893. The article opposed holding the civil service examination in India on the ground that Brahmins and other high caste Hindus will easily get through the examination and become collectors and other leading officials in the public service, and will, in consequence of their superior position, treat the Parayas and other low caste men with racial contempt and dislike. The second news, which appeared in July 1894, which said the National Congress, composed mostly Bengalis and Brahmins with selfish motives, has been agitating for simultaneous examination in India. The dispatch of Secretary of State, Mr. Fowler, has once and for all silenced the selfish congressmen for the good of the country. So the House of Commons had stated that any further move on the issue would depend on the opinion of the Secretary of the State. The second article reveals that the Secretary of State, Mr. Fowler, did not send the report in favor of the issue. As a result, sympathizers of the simultaneous examination were silent. Also, the Secretary of State announced in Parliament that there was no possibility to introduce simultaneous examination in present situation in the country. At this juncture, Parayan announced in its issue dated 25th August 1894 that any attempt on the part of the so-called high caste men to have the civil service examination held in India will be of no avail. Subsequently, subsequent to the announcement by Mr. Fowler, the supporters of simultaneous examination called for meeting. Okay, many nationalist journals put forth their arguments in favor of simultaneous exams, but Parayan and some Muslim journals countered those arguments. The congressmen conducted a meeting in support of simultaneous examination. In critique of that meeting, the Parayan argued that no pariahs, Muslims, native Christians, and other lower castes were present at the meeting. The meeting was attended only by students of Pachepa's college, where the meeting was held. Further, it said that if the proposal became a reality, Brahmins alone would prove to be successful candidates and fill high offices. The article also criticized the Brahmins, stating that they are a selfish class caring only for their welfare, totally unmindful of the well-being of other classes. A more or less similar view was expressed by the Muhammadan Muslim journals. It is clear that the opinion of the Parayan played an important role in the issue of simultaneous examination. The Parayan's tough opposition compelled the Congress to adopt policies in favor of the depressed classes. Congress leader Dadabhai Naoroji advised to the Madras Congress Committee to adopt necessary steps regarding the depressed classes was definitely a victory for Parayan. We do not know what measures were taken by the Madras Congress Committee regarding the depressed classes, but no, this communication from the Dadabhai Naoroji definitely was the victory for the Parayan's protest against the simultaneous examination. So, after a year, after the year, it seems that the issue was revived by the Parliament by Dadabhai Naoroji. In this situation, a correspondent wrote in the Parayan Journal in 1895. Mr. Dadabhai Naoroji is intending to move before Parliament a proposition that the decision of the Secretary of State on the question of simultaneous examination was unjust, while exhorting the Sudras, Mohammedans, and Parayas to bind themselves together and oppose the proposition and not to be led astray by the Congress organized by the crafty Brahmins. The Parayan gave an opinion call to the oppressed people, Sudras and Mohammedans, to oppose the issue. So, actually, the situation, which changed dramatically in the following months, as Dadabhai Naoroji was not elected as member of Parliament for second term. So, Parayan expressed its joy by writing that Dadabhai Naoroji has not been elected as member of Parliament, and now Bhavnagiri, the opponent of the Congress, has succeeded in gaining a seat in Parliament. The Parayan also believed that the failure of Naoroji would greatly weaken the spirit of Congress, an assembly constituted by Brahmins, and hereafter the efforts of Brahmins will be useless. The paper also added the Bhavnagiri would struggle hard to represent before Parliament the grievances of the poor of India and also worklessness of the Congress. The editor of Parayan, Rettaimalai Srinivasan, believed the British rule and British officials alone could function without caste prejudice and could consequently improve the life of untouchables. But in certain issues, he did not hesitate to criticize the British government and its officials. And conclusion. So, some important aspects of Rettaimalai Srinivasan's journalistic work must be summed up here. First is his conception of the public. He criticized the Congress for not admitting oppressed people into the organization. Besides, its agenda was only to obtain political freedom, while Srinivasan advocated for social equality. He often insisted upon the inclusion of Parayas, Muslims, Anglo-Indians, native Christians in the Congress. He was very strong in his position that no organization could claim to be national without including pariahs in its fold. Many of his correspondents also wrote against the monstrous inequities of caste. Whenever Srinivasan wrote against the Congress agenda of self-rule, he quoted incidents of caste discrimination and practices of untouchability in the country, which clearly insisted that internal social reformation was a must before political reformation. He asserted that India is eligible for freedom only when it treats pariahs equally. He was also very cautious about power sharing with Indians. This is obvious in relation to the issue of civil service simultaneous examination for civil services. He was of the opinion that without annihilating caste and graded differences in India, it was unjust to give self-rule to Indians. If the British left the country, the Brahmins would become the rulers and will use government machinery against the pariahs, he argued. So, Rettaimalai Srinivasan, not only the civil service examination issues, he differed with Indian National Congress on each and every issue. Okay, the main objective of Parian was to form a distinct identity for oppressed people and to mobilize them on the basis of that identity to achieve the goal of equal status. Thank you very much. This is my presentation. Thank you, one and all.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. That was really fascinating, and thank you. You addressed so many different topics. I wonder, I have many questions, but I will let Marina go first and manage the talk. Otherwise, I could completely take over, which I don't want, because I want everyone else here to get the chance to ask you those questions. But thank you very much. That was fascinating. Thank you both. Marina, over to you.
Thank you. I agree. It was very interesting. Thank you very much. I would like to ask people to invite people to indicate their wish to ask questions in the chat so that I could invite you to speak in the proper order. In the meantime, I planned to ask a question myself, but people have been lining up with questions already. And I find that the question that Eric Moran, my colleague from Haifa University, addressed to me in the chat should take preference. So I would like to invite him. Eric, are you here?
Very much here, yes. Hi, so thank you for hosting the event, and thank you both for giving your wonderful talks. And we've intruded on your lovely project from our own course, and since we're a little less conversant with the materials, I was wondering whether, for the benefit of the people from Haifa and maybe for all of us, to just touch base broadly and situate your talks in the wider field of what was happening to Indian society in the 19th to 20th centuries. Just a few words, just so we have context on who the figure is, what is unique about these writings, and so forth. In really introductory kind of simple terms.
Bala, Malar, I don't know who would like to go first.
Malar, can you respond?
Malar, you're muted, maybe.
Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, Malar, unmute yourself. Unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So just a brief introduction to the time period we're talking about. It's between 1860 and 1945. So this is a time of British rule in India. India is declared independent in 1947. So Rettaimalai Srinivasan's time ends just before that. So it's a time of British rule. There is a lot of agitation going on, both for anti-colonial freedom from British rule and anti-caste protests as well. I don't know what else to say in terms of the political situation. Did you have any more specific questions about which aspect of the political situation you'd like to hear more about?
A little more about perhaps, I mean, the connections between North and South, because we've been dealing, our readings are primarily limited to the north of India, and it's a very Tamil kind of connection going on here, although it obviously has implications on the national level. So just really to connect these dots so we could have a little more context, that's all.
So a lot of Rettaimalai Srinivasan's work was within the colonial administrative bloc called the Madras Presidency. So that was South India. It encompassed districts where people spoke Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, and Kannada. So it was a large administrative bloc, and there was some level of what you might call federation. I think the different parts of India, the northern provinces and the southern provinces, often had different histories of their own in terms of anti-caste protest and in terms of nationalist mobilization. But during this time, these blocs are starting to come together. So the Indian National Congress is interested in what's happening in Madras Presidency as well, even though Srinivasan, for example, complains that they're more interested in what Brahmins and Bengalis have to say. So there is, political movements are beginning to stitch together the country, is what I'm trying to say at this point. And Srinivasan is an active part of these movements. And his work gives us an insight into how the country was coming together in some places and drifting apart in others.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. Just one follow-up question is how widely circulated were his works then? I mean, do you have figures for this? I'm not sure.
One of his works was published in English. He wrote an open letter to Gandhi. He was very critical of Gandhi for the way in which he was more interested in abolishing untouchability while leaving the system of caste intact. So he wrote an open letter in English, which he doesn't describe in detail, so we don't know what the circulation is. I was able to uncover this letter in an archive recently, and from what I can tell, it's directed to a national audience, but there's no other information about how it circulated. So that's one piece of the English writing that was addressed to a national audience. There were other letters back and forth with the colonial administration itself, and finally his work in Tamil. So this autobiography was written in Tamil and published in 1938. And then he also wrote a series of pamphlets educating the public about different political goings on. So things like the Round Table Conference and the Pune Pact. He was writing pamphlets about so people can understand what was happening at the national level. We have very little information though about the circulation. What we can guess is there is one piece of writing intended for a national audience and there are several others intended for circulation among Tamil groups. And that's the most we can find out at this point.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Judith wanted to ask the next question.
Yes, thank you very much for both papers. It's always fascinating to have a look at the oppression from outside and the oppression from inside. A little bit that's in the context of the African Americans who had to fight the two fronts, in fact, of the war outside outside the US in Europe and inside against racism. So it always makes me think of that comparison. So same thing for the British Raj and also the war inside. So in that context, then maybe as a follow-up on the question about the journal, maybe that is going to come up. I had a question for you, Mala, about the translation. because you refer to the translation. So I suppose it is your translation that is going to come out and be published. Is it possible to know a little bit more about the process, in fact, that led up to the translation? Because when you have a translation being published, I mean, you have a publishing company that actually supports this this publication. It means that there is interest, and at the same time, it creates interest as well, obviously. So I'd like to know a little bit more about the expected audience for that translation. Is it going to be national, global? What has been the process? What have been the challenges also in the translation? So that kind of thing.
Okay, so I'm hoping to publish this with Navayana Publishers. They're based out of Delhi, but they do have a global audience. Yeah, so I'm hoping that many people will read it. As for the process,
both specialized and looking also to a global audience. Okay.
As for the process, I completed this some years ago, actually. When I was running a blog on anti-caste history, I was just publishing pieces of the translation for an Indian audience. So at that point, I wasn't thinking about going into print, and it was a relatively rapid process. So his Tamil is slightly archaic, but it's not unintelligible. So translating.
Are you going to make it more contemporary, or are you going to keep the archaic dimension? That's it's a huge question.
So, yeah, there's some idiomatic usage, for example, which is very particular to the period, which I try to retain as is. For example, when he was leaving from India for Africa, he gets a telegram from his father asking him to come back. And so he says, and this is a literal translation, deciding that the corpse that has gone to the burning ghat cannot return, I embarked on a ship and left. So the corpse that has gone to a burning ghat is a very idiomatic usage. We don't use that anymore. But that was one example of language specific to the period that still gives us a sense of the distance of this text from our time. But
so you're going to keep
intelligible.
it, and then
it as is. Yeah.
You provide comment and you provide explanations on your translation. So there would be a lot of the translators' comments, I suppose. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, the next question came from Surya Simon. I think I should read it out. It's in the comments. You can also see it there. I don't know, Malar or Bala, to whom of you, it's probably to Malar. Would you be able to elaborate on the terms and its relation, Adi Dravida, Pareya, and Dalit? You have spoken both and used both of all of these terms, but if you could look at the contemporary view of these terms, it would be insightful.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, the word Pareya, which means the name of the caste. Okay. Now they consist mostly in Tamil Nadu, one of the largest ex-untouchable caste. So at the time of Rettaimalai Srinivasan, he mobilized people in the name of asserting the identity. Asserting the identity of Pareya. He says that only by using the term, you have to mobilize the people. So even today there is a taboo attaching to the term. So people are using to scold someone. They are using the word Pareya. So in the international context, the Pareya means it is outcast and something. Okay. But voluntarily Rettaimalai Srinivasan named his organization as Parayar Mahajana Sabha and named his journal as Parayan in order to assert against the name. And the Adi Dravida, no, which was coined in 1920s, which means no, the original Dravidians, which came from family. They conglomerated a number of untouchable castes into Adi Dravida category. Actually, it was a political category coined by Dalit leader M.C. Raja in 1920s in Madras Presidency. Under the Adi Dravida, all the South Indian untouchable castes, categorized. So they all called, as Adi Dravida. This Dalit, the term Dalit, which introduced after the 90s as a political umbrella term for the ex-untouchable, and not only the untouchables, and also the many caste groups, other backward communities, and also. These are the background of these three words.
Should I add to that?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
So the word Dalit, as Bala pointed out, is a much more recent term, and it's a large umbrella term to refer to oppressed groups in general. What the other terms like Adi Dravida and Paraya do in Rettaimalai Srinivasan's work is to show us that this process of crafting a national or a regional identity is still very much a process at this time. Here in the autobiography, he uses Adi Dravida, he uses Paraya, he uses Panchamar as terms to refer to both people of the Paraya caste and to untouchable castes in general. But he is aware of the fact that the Paraya is the name of a caste that is considered highest among the formerly untouchable castes. So in one open letter to Gandhi, he's writing that the Paraya are the highest class of agrarian laborers. So he is aware of the location of the caste on the hierarchy, and he is constantly grappling with that term. That's why he switches between Adi Dravida and Paraya. Now, the interesting thing about Adi Dravida is that it's taking the term Dravidian and adding original Dravidian as a descriptor. So that suggests to us that the category Dravidian, which had been used to refer to Paraya castes in older writing, has now been appropriated by the Shudra castes. So they have started to refer to themselves as Dravidian. And so Dalit groups retaliate by calling themselves Adi Dravida or original Dravidians. So by claiming original residents in the region. So that's the relationship between the three terms.
Thank you. I would like to ask Purna to speak. The question about the journal. Are you here?
Yeah.
Purna?
It's about.
Probably. Okay. Then maybe the next one was Itai Agmon, sorry. Would you like to ask your question or should I read it out?
You can just read it out. Thank you.
So the question is, did Srinivasan and his journal had a stand regarding the future of partition or unity of the independent India? Can you say something about that?
Yeah. Actually, the journal published from 1893 to 1900. Only 7 years it got published. After that, he left to South Africa. Actually, he wanted to annihilate the caste before achieving the independence. For that only he fought for. And he addressed many things through the journal. He clearly says while starting his journal, I started inform to the people about the government policies and actions, affirmative actions and all. He says that there was a law for pariahs education, but this law was not reached to the people concerned. Propagate or in order to inform to the people, I started this journal. He says in his autobiography. So, for independent India, in his writings, we could find that a casteless India. He dreamt for a casteless India. That is his message in his writings. If anything else, no, Malar, no.
Malar, would you like to add to that?
No, I think Bala's covered the answer.
Okay, I'm asking just in case, Purna, you wanted to ask a question about the journal. Maybe you can just, oh yes. Maybe you can just say a little more about the content of the journal. Bala?
Content of the journal. Yeah.
We cannot hear you very well. I don't know what happened, but we hear you much worse than before.
Now you can hear me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is it audible now?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, in his journal, now he published many things on education for pariah people, and wherever the discrimination takes place against the people, he addressed it. And in the letter to the editor part is very important. Many people from many parts of South India, they wrote letter to the Pariah journal, and he published it. And after publishing it, he sent a copy to the concerned officers in order to take actions. So many civil matters he took, like education, sanitation, sanitary facilities, hostel facilities. These all facilities not available to the pariah people. So so he covered all these issues, and he had the subscriptions from overseas also, from Sri Lanka, South Africa, and all. So he had readers from overseas also. And this is the this is about content of the journal.
Purna was able to elaborate on the question in the chat. So the question is if there were only essays or criticism or also things like poetry and cartoons in the journal.
No, we did not publish the cartoon. Actually, the problem is we could not get the original copy of the journal. All these were excerpts from the colonial records. So only one half piece of journal is available now. So we could not find more about the cartoons and pictures and all. So we get the contents, the very politically important contents, which recorded for surveillance purpose. From that except only we could interpret about the journal. But no, we could find the journal published widely in South India, and the readers also actively engaged in the discussions raised in the journal, and they sent a letter to the editor. Many letters got published, and the particular cases are there. Whenever they are there is a violence by the caste Hindus or caste oppressors, they write a letter to the Pariah, and it was published in the journal.
So yeah, they use it for everyday politics also.
I see. Thank you. So actually, we plan to finish at 3:30 here in Israel, where it is 3:40 now. But I really would like to ask my question. So if I may, it will be the last one then. My question is to Malar. I think it's about the autobiography or the genre of autobiography. What I want to ask is this. In the Western world, autobiographies or biographies used to be written or at least published about famous people, politicians, actors, sportlers, well-known people who were known to the public and about whose lives the public was likely to want to learn more, right? So this is the one side, and the other side is the genre of Dalit autobiographies today, where they have often been described as a kind of collective autobiographies, where Dalit authors do not claim to write autobiographies because they're famous, because people will want to know about their private lives or something like that, but because they represent this vast group of people whose lives have not been written about previously. And many Dalit authors, as you surely know, claim that their autobiographies are not their own, that if any other person from my Dalit neighborhood were to write an autobiography, he would have written the same, or I'm writing for all the people from my jati or from my caste. I read and heard such things a lot. So these two characteristics, I wanted to ask about Srinivasan, because his autobiography, as you have pointed out, is of course likely to have been the first Dalit autobiography. So there was no tradition of Dalit autobiographies, of course. And his autobiography does sound like it belongs into the first category of an autobiography of a famous person, a national leader. So what I'm wondering is whether there is anything in his autobiography that suggests this other side, the collective aspect of the Dalit autobiography that we see today. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah. So, for the most part, it is a political biography of a person who's well known as a legislator at the regional and national level. But also, especially in the early parts, he's writing about his attempts to understand the condition of the caste he was born into. So he's writing about traveling south and looking at other settlements where Dalit people live, and coming back feeling like he has to do something about it. So there is a sense of this text belonging to the collective as well. It is not just about, it's not just a list of accomplishments, and it's also an attempt to speak for the caste. So I see both elements there, yeah.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to your translation. Meantime, Surya Simon asked whether the journal addressed gender and caste. Bala, I don't suppose so.
Yeah, from our excerpts, we could find more on caste and anti-conquerors, and not much on gender. Around 100 excerpts, 100 pieces, I could find more on caste, not one or two on gender. That is for education for women, education for oppressed women, and also propagated for education for women. In that way, if journal, we could get the original copy of the journal, we could find more. But I don't know.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry. I think we should say that this meeting is over. Thank you so much for your presentations, for your questions, for your answers. This was very interesting, very enlightening, and I am looking forward to the translation, which of course Nicole will you will probably announce.
Yes, please, Mala, let us know when
Thank
your
you.
translation is out, and we'll send
For
out
coming
a
in.
message. I think I really enjoy sending out these messages about new translations. It's always exciting. And thank you both so much. You know, I've learned so much, you know, because I've came across his name quite a few times in passing, but I could never really place him. And, you know, thank you, Mala, about this work on the civil service exams, and clearly I only knew sort of the no Congress biased version of it, so that was incredibly fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think yes, we'll thank everybody, and we'll look forward to another session like this in 2 weeks' time, and I will be sending out information shortly. Thank you.
So will I.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.